Hi there, I'm Reed Peterson, and welcome to Grief Refuge. If this is your first time listening, welcome, and you're in for a treat. Here at Grief Refuge, we hold sacred space for your grief. It gets honored, and you're invited to explore the deeper understandings of your process. So in other words, you're invited to feel everything that comes up. You'll find Grief Refuge to be very different from other grief-related podcasts. Instead of scratching the surface about your grief, we go much deeper. Consider this podcast your personal PhD for your grieving process. I appreciate your listenership regardless of this being your first or your 45th time listening. I sincerely hope you feel more comforted, supported, and more informed about navigating your grief journey. Because of the depth and the nature of this topic, it may be more beneficial to stop multitasking while listening. Rather, I invite you to use this time for your self-care and personal reflection. Use this time to relax and allow your grief-related feelings to run their course. Use this time to mourn your loss. Today I'll be sharing a topic with you that's very near and dear to my heart. I have a client who told me that recently he's been trying to figure out what my tenets are. And I thought to myself, do I have grief tenets? And after a little bit of time thinking about it, I was like, well, maybe I should. So I came up with these principles, and although I don't refer to them as tenets, I do consider them unspoken truths about the grieving process. So enjoy. There comes a time when grief finds you and it feels like a tornado whirling inside of you. You find yourself not only feeling the sorrow, but also feeling utterly confused about the whole experience. You haven't felt this way before. You have no idea what's going on inside of you. All this grief is making it so hard to function, and you don't know what you're supposed to do. Welcome to the world of grief, my friend. A land where lying in bed might be the only place you want to be. A land where tears flow like mountain streams. A land where loneliness makes you question so many things about life and the purpose of living. I'm truly sorry you're here. My sincere condolences for your loss. My intention for this message, it's to help you understand what to expect about the grief process. I want to provide a few insights about what grief may feel like to you. I want to give you some tips to help navigate this journey that feels so alone and so isolating. To begin, I want to share something that may be the hardest to hear. Believe it or not, you're actually grieving the right way. You've experienced something deeply impactful that it can feel like the world is now an unfamiliar place. When everything looks and feels unfamiliar, it can be easy to feel like you just don't belong, or that you're invisible to everyone else around you. When you feel this way, it's easy to judge your grieving process, telling yourself something like, nobody else looks like they're grieving, so I must be doing this wrong. This thought of doing grief wrong often comes up when you find yourself crying all day long, or you're feeling beyond exhausted from all the tears. It's also common when you realize some time has passed, but yet you continue to feel the same way. And that leads to my next tip. If you feel stuck, please know that you're not. Oh, how interesting it is that the people of this world we live in, we love to track progress. We have linear projections, we analyze data, we have visual representations showing the path from point A to point B. These are so valued in the world we live in today. It's so easy to think that grief should be of a similar sort. But grief is so different. It's not linear, nor is it consistent. You just can't measure it in the sense that you're able to track it to a point where you can predict to control its outcome. This inability to do so can make you both think and feel that you're stuck. When you're grieving, what's important to remember is the subtle things that happen throughout the journey. What I mean by that is to recognize small things that create shifts in your daily experience. For example, getting out of the house for the first time, or making your first meal after you've lost someone so significant. These activities are so expected as adults, but they become difficult to do when in deep grief. Once you're able to do something like that again, you may not remember how challenging it was in grief because they're just adult things that everybody does. Another thing about thinking you're stuck in grief is that it's easy to expect or anticipate big events to happen that will completely change the way you feel. For example, if you've been crying for a long time, you might expect yourself to stop crying altogether within a certain amount of time. I wish grief worked this way. It would be easier on everyone. Yet it doesn't. And grief will likely stay with you for the rest of your life. The longer it's around, yes, it will hurt less, and it may become a part of you that can influence your daily activities. Could influence you 5, 15, or 50 years from now. What will help you feel a sense of flow in your grief is to appreciate yourself for the small, subtle things that grief made so difficult, but currently they're no longer so. Another tip to support you in the grieving process is to ask the people in your life to treat you with compassion. Now, I know that this sounds really weird, but if anyone to respond to you with cruelty or denunciation rather than honesty and sincerity, it might be in your best interest to seek grief support from someone else. I like to describe compassion as a gentleness and kindness that honors your grief. Most people don't know how to do that. However, if you just ask people in your life to treat you with compassion, hopefully they'll do their best to be more sensitive to your needs in whatever way they know how. Asking to be treated with compassion may sound like a silly request, but trust me, it's all right to ask. Truthfully, I haven't heard anyone tell me that they've asked their loved ones to treat them with compassion yet, so I hope you're the first. Grief is not only painful, it's delicate. It needs compassion to feel cared for. Before I share the next tip, I want to say one more thing about compassion. You'll feel more compassion from others when you also treat yourself with compassion. The universe can be a mirror to what you feel and think on the inside. If you treat your grief with compassion, there will be people that you'll meet along your grief journey who will reflect even more compassion to you. It's a beautiful experience, and I hope that these words resonate enough to help you be more compassionate to yourself. The next tip is more of an awareness than anything else. I want to tell you, your brain will try to control your grief. See, your brain is this powerful command center that controls all the other functions of your body. It's the one in control and it calls the shots. I think the mind is somewhere in the brain, and the way I see it, the mind is hanging out up in its penthouse. It's either being aware of what the rest of you is doing, or it's taking a break, and you're on automatic pilot. The mind needs to rest a lot, so when you're grieving, things can feel like utter confusion and exhaustion, in addition to the many other feelings you're experiencing. The exhaustion and the confusion is what I think the inner automated conflict between your brain working hard to control everything and then your grief retaliating with the need to feel the emotion. This is a theory of mine, and I do want to preface that I don't have all the science to fully back this up at this time. But time and time again, I hear clients that I support speak to this energy draining phenomenon. To me, this is a very common experience for people's grieving hearts and souls. I hope that makes sense, and I get that if it's your first time feeling deep grief, it's not an easy concept to grasp and fully understand. But if there's any takeaway from this tip, it's that when you feel that fog of grief, understand that your brain is working so hard to try to control it. And that if you take refuge in a safe space and allow the feelings to flow, you may feel temporary relief from the exhaustion and or the confusion. And the final tip I want to share with you is to tell your story. Many people seek grief support groups because they want to know that they're not alone. I highly recommend you do the same. However, I find it funny because I rarely hear someone say that they want to join a grief support group to tell their story. But yet, as I learn more about their experience within the support group, what I hear is that they feel so much support and being witnessed for the telling of their story. One of the best ways to tell your story and also be witnessed by people who are less likely to judge you is within a grief support group. To find a good one, I highly recommend contacting a local hospice, a hospital, a church, or a funeral home in your community. Within a good grief support group, you'll have the opportunity to share your story and go deeper into what pains you and what also brings you comfort. This can be a powerful and transformative experience. But on the flip side, I understand that groups may be uncomfortable for some people, and that's very okay. If a group is uncomfortable for you, there are opportunities to share your story with a grief counselor or companion. I'm a grief companion, and I know that many people don't know what that means. So one of the ways that I work is to focus on witnessing your story and just letting it be your guide for your healing process. In my work, my intention is to nurture what feels authentic to you through holding sacred space. And in my role, I keep soft eyes, I keep a closed mouth, and I keep my ears and my heart open. So if you've had thoughts that no one could give a rat's, you know what, or nobody wants to hear your story, I would gently challenge you, and that there are people who do. They may not be in the room next to you right now, but they may just be a call or a message away. They're out there, and they are available to listen and hold sacred space for your grief process. So those are my 5 unspoken truths about grief. Thank you so much for listening. As a recap, here are the 5 truths to help when your grief is really hurting or all of this process feels new to you, please know that 1, you are doing your grief right. You always are. 2, you may feel stuck, but you're really not. Just recognize those subtleties in your daily experience. 3, ask others to treat you with compassion. No matter how silly, how vulnerable, or uncomfortable it may feel, you won't regret it. 4, your brain will try to control your grief. Just relax into it and let the feelings flow. 5, telling your grief story helps. You can share them in support groups or with the help of a grief counselor or grief companion. Well, I want to thank you tremendously for joining me today. It's such an honor to hold space for your grief and your healing. If you found this helpful, let us know by rating and reviewing the Grief Refuge podcast or sending us a message at griefrefuge.com. Also, I have a very special announcement to share with you. The Grief Refuge app is now available to download on your smartphone. If you haven't heard of this before, the Grief Refuge app is a daily companion to comfort and support you on the grief journey. Every day, you get a new audio musing, of which I call the Daily Refuge, and then there's also stories of healing and a tool for tracking your healing process and quite a few more features. It's so easy to find. All you have to do is search Grief Refuge in the App Store or the Google Play Store. You can download it for free and get started today. Thanks again for your listenership. Take care, keep honoring your grief, be kind to yourself, and talk to you soon.